For years, she believed staying would prove how strong her love was. But love was never the problem. The problem was that he kept turning her devotion into a weapon against her. Her name was Nadia Cole. She was 32 years old when her husband reserved the front table at their own anniversary dinner for the woman he had been choosing instead of her, and left her standing at the entrance of the Meridian Ballroom in a purple dress she had picked 6 weeks before, back when she still believed she was loved. The placard was gold-edged, small, precise. The kind of detail you only notice when you are looking for a reason to keep breathing steadily in a room full of people who are already watching you. It said, reserved. It did not say her name. She stood there in that wrap dress, the purple one with the small gold earrings she wore, because Siwoo once told her she looked like something worth keeping in that color, and she understood everything all at once. Not slowly, not the way you figure out a puzzle, the way a window breaks. 1 second it is whole, the next, it is just pieces. She was already seated. Her name was Yuna. She was wearing white, a long white gown that caught the light like she had been placed there on purpose, like a centerpiece someone arranged before the guests arrived. She was laughing at something. A real laugh, open and unguarded, the kind that comes from a woman who believes she is safe. Her glass was already full, and Siwoo, her husband, in his black tuxedo, champagne flute held loosely in one hand like the whole evening cost him nothing. He never once looked toward the entrance. He had trained himself not to. He had practiced the exact angle at which a man can stand in a room and make his wife invisible without ever turning his back. Everyone in that ballroom already knew. Nadia could feel it in the way the room got just slightly quieter when she walked in. The way eyes moved away from hers a half-second too fast. These were people who had been to their home, people who had eaten at their table, people who had watched her stand next to Siwoo at events for 4 years and call it a marriage. They knew, and they had come anyway. They had dressed up and come to watch. Here is what you need to understand about Nadia before the rest of this story unfolds. She was not a foolish woman. She was not someone who missed signs because she was not looking. She was a project manager. She read contracts for a living. She had a mother who pressed receipts flat with her thumb before she filed them, and told her, every single time, that a woman who keeps records keeps her options. Nadia chose Siwoo with her full mind. She looked at him, the stillness of him, the quiet, the way he made a room feel like it was under control, and she thought, this is a man who is safe. This is a man who will not disappear. She was half right. He did not disappear. He simply built a door she didn't know existed, and for 4 years, he walked through it every chance he got. What Siwoo did not know, as Nadia stood at that entrance with one hand on the doorframe and one tear, just one, the only one she allowed herself, sliding down her left cheek, was that she had been keeping records for 7 months. She had photographed the accounts, she had saved the emails, she had already made the call to her attorney 3 weeks before this dinner. He looked across that room like she was already finished. He had no idea she had not even started. The moment you realize the person you built your life around was building something else the whole time, without you, beside you, right in front of you, is the loneliest kind of pain there is. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, gold-edged and quiet, wearing your name on nothing. Have you ever walked into a room and realized, all at once, that the people in it knew something about your life that you didn't? If you have, hit like, and tell me in the comments, what did you do in that moment? Did you walk out, or did you stand your ground? I read every single comment. Her name was Nadia Cole. She was 34 years old, senior financial compliance officer, the kind of woman who read a room the way most people read a menu, quickly, accurately, and without making a show of it. She was her mother's daughter in every way that mattered. Her mother had been a Ghanaian British woman who believed, with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned it the hard way, that a woman who documents her life keeps her options open. She pressed receipts flat before she filed them. She read everything with her name on it twice. She told Nadia, over and over, in that calm voice that never needed to be loud to be heard, write it down, baby. Not because you're suspicious, because you are worth protecting. Her mother died 2 years before the marriage. And that lesson, that one specific lesson, traveled with Nadia like a hand on her shoulder. She met Siwoo Cole at an industry gala on a Thursday evening in October. The room was loud and bright and full of people who wanted to be noticed. Siwoo was the only person in it who seemed completely uninterested in being noticed. He stood near the window with a glass he barely touched, watching the room with eyes that took everything in but gave nothing back. Nadia noticed him, because stillness in a loud room is its own kind of power. He was deliberate in the way he pursued her. Attentive, patient. He made her feel chosen. Not tolerated, not convenient, not good enough. Chosen. And for a woman who had spent years in relationships where she was the one doing the choosing, and still ending up alone, that feeling was extraordinary. Her best friend Chelsea met him 3 months in. Chelsea was a corporate attorney, and had a gift for reading people that she rarely used as a weapon, but always used as a compass. She looked at Siwoo across a dinner table and said, later, walking to the car, "He's impressive. I'm just not sure if impressive and safe are the same thing with him." Nadia heard it. She filed it somewhere deep. And she chose Siwoo anyway, because she was 32 years old, and she had read the room, and she believed she knew what she was walking into. The wedding was small and intentional. Both families came. Neither family was entirely comfortable. There was champagne and careful smiles, and the kind of politeness that works hard not to look like effort. And at the reception, Siwoo's mother called Nadia by the wrong name. Siwoo did not correct her. Nadia noticed. She chose grace. She told herself that beginnings have rough edges, and that this was only the start. She would spend the next 4 years learning the difference between rough edges and warning signs. The first year of the marriage, Nadia learned Siwoo's world, the business dinners, the social circles with their quiet, invisible rankings, the cultural expectations she was supposed to absorb without being taught, perform without being prepared, and never ask to have explained. She adapted, because she had always been good at adapting. Too good, her mother would have said. That year, she placed her mother's inheritance into what she understood to be a joint investment account. She disclosed it fully. She offered it freely. It felt like trust was made visible, like saying, with money, what she had already said with vows. That same year, Siwoo closed a property deal that changed his professional standing entirely. It was covered in their industry. People talked about it at dinners. And at every single one of those dinners, Siwoo talked about it the way a man talks about something he built entirely alone. His acumen, his vision, his timing. Nadia sat beside him at those tables and said nothing. She told herself the private accounting would be fair. She told herself that a man who loved her would not take credit for what she funded and call it his. She told herself a lot of things that year. It was around that time that Yuna appeared. Siwoo introduced her as his most reliable business associate. She had a precise smile and clothing that cost the same as Nadia's monthly salary. Nadia's first read of her was not alarm. It was a specific, careful attention. The way you pay attention to something that doesn't quite fit in a pattern you've been studying, without realizing you were studying it. And then there was the lock on Siwoo's home office drawer. Mentioned once, never explained. Nadia did not ask. She noted it in the way her mother taught her to note things. Quietly, completely, and without letting on. The second year of the marriage arrived with a temperature change that Nadia would only be able to name in hindsight. The dinners he canceled, always with a reason. Reasonable, clean, hard to argue with. She stopped asking follow-up questions because the answers were built to satisfy, without actually informing, and she was tired of feeling foolish for noticing the difference. He had a way, in professional settings, of redirecting her when she spoke. Not rudely, consistently, with the patient, practiced energy of a man who believes the woman beside him needs managing. She started using simpler words when he was in the room, shorter sentences. She took up less conversational space, and she did it so gradually that she didn't notice it happening until Chelsea came back for another visit and said, over coffee, without drama, "You used to finish your sentences." Nadia had no response to that. Siwoo's mother was in their lives more that year. She had opinions about Nadia's cooking, about her hair, about her loudness. Always delivered in Korean, always translated by Siwoo into something softer and less cutting than what his mother's face was actually saying. What no one knew, not Siwoo, not his mother, was that Nadia had been quietly teaching herself Korean for 18 months. She understood more than anyone at that table realized. She had been understanding, and recording, and saying nothing. Her mother's daughter, all the way through. Then came Tuesday morning that changed everything. Siwoo was traveling. Nadia was working from home. She walked to the printer to retrieve a document and found something that was not hers. A property transfer receipt. For an address she recognized, the investment property her inheritance had funded. She looked at the ownership line. She read the name on it. It was not her name. Her hands went still. Not from shock. From recognition. The feeling of a pattern that has been building for 2 years finally deciding to introduce itself. She did not call Siwoo. She photographed the document with her phone, placed it exactly as she'd found it in the tray, and went back to her desk. She finished her workday. She made dinner. She was very calm in the way that people are calm when something inside them has already made a decision, and the rest of them is just catching up. That evening, she called Chelsea. "I need you to come this weekend. Bring your clear head." Chelsea arrived Saturday morning with coffee, and the expression of a woman who already suspected she knew why she'd been called. Nadia spread everything across the kitchen table. The photograph of the receipt, 18 months of financial statements she had been quietly collecting, the leather notebook she'd been filling since the first year, the one with dates and amounts, and things Siwoo said at dinners that didn't match the statements she later pulled. Chelsea went through every page without rushing. She turned each one carefully, and set it face down and moved to the next. When she finished, she set her pen down flat on the table. "Nadia, your name isn't on any of this. I know. How long have you known?" Nadia looked at the table. "I think I've been knowing for a year. And only naming it for about 6 minutes." Chelsea's voice stayed even. She recommended an attorney. Someone specific, someone discreet, someone Nadia needed to call before she did anything else, before she changed anything, before Siwoo had any reason to believe the arrangement was being examined. That night, after Chelsea left, Nadia went to her files and pulled out her mother's original bank transfer documentation. The wire for the inheritance, the one she had believed went into their joint account. She looked at the account number on the transfer. Then she pulled up every account number she had ever had access to in this marriage. They did not match. She sat with that for a long time. Then she opened her leather notebook, and she began writing in a different way than she ever had before. Not just observations, dates, amounts, account numbers, sequences, the shape of a thing that had been happening while she was busy calling it a marriage. Her mother's voice was very clear to her in that room that night. "Write it down. Not because you're suspicious, because you are worth protecting." She wrote it all down. For the next 7 months, Nadia performed the marriage with the same composure she brought to every difficult thing. She made dinner. She attended his events. She stood beside him at industry functions and smiled at the people who would later watch her standing alone at a ballroom entrance. She delivered new documents to her attorney every 2 weeks, quietly, carefully, without changing a single thing about her behavior that might cause Siwoo to look at her differently. Her attorney reviewed everything with the unhurried precision of someone who respects the work that has been handed to her. "Significant financial irregularities," she said, at their 3rd meeting. "Possibly actionable. We need forensic accounting before we move. And then, do not telegraph anything. Let him believe the arrangement is stable." Nadia understood. She had been performing stability for longer than she could remember. She was very good at it. 4 months into those 7, she was at an industry conference. Her own firm, her own work. One of the few spaces in her life that Siwoo had never colonized. She was walking through a hotel corridor to her room, when a door opened 3 rooms ahead of her, and Yuna stepped out. They both stopped. Neither one pretended not to know who the other was. They stood in that corridor and looked at each other, and the silence between them was not hostile. It was just enormous. Yuna spoke first. Her voice was steady, but something behind her eyes was working very hard. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Something moved across Yuna's face. The shape of what she thought she had been living inside had just changed, and she knew it, and it showed, just for a second, before she pulled herself back together. They did not exchange numbers. They did not make plans. They went their separate ways down that corridor, and both of them carried the weight of what had just been said. Nadia drove to the parking garage and sat in her car and called Chelsea. Nadia told Chelsea about her. Chelsea was quiet for a beat. "And what does that tell you about how he operates?" Nadia looked at the concrete wall in front of her and thought about a man who stood in rooms at careful angles, who locked drawers, who translated his mother's cruelty into something softer, who had spent 4 years building a structure in which everyone had a function and no one ever got to see the whole board. "It tells me," Nadia said slowly, "that no one in his life has ever been allowed to see the whole picture. Not me, not her, not anyone." She started the car. She had 3 months left before the anniversary dinner. 3 months before she would walk into the Meridian ballroom in a purple dress and find a gold-edged placard that did not carry her name. 3 months before she would stand at the entrance of a room full of people who already knew and feel the weight of a betrayal that was never meant to be private. But she also had 7 months of records, and an attorney who was ready, and the one thing Siwoo, for all his careful architecture, had never once accounted for: a woman who had been taught, by the person who loved her most, that the truth is always worth writing down. 6 weeks before the dinner, Siwoo asked Nadia to coordinate the event. He always asked her. 3 years in a row, he had stood in their kitchen with his coffee and said she was exceptional at these things. And she was. She knew how to make a room feel intentional. She knew how to choose flowers that didn't compete with the lighting, how to place people at tables so the right conversations would happen, how to build an evening that felt effortless because every detail had been handled before anyone arrived. So she built it. The venue. The florals, the catering, the music, the guest list. 60 people, arranged across 12 tables, and at the front, position 1, beside Siwoo, she placed herself. She confirmed her seat 3 times, once when she submitted the seating chart to his assistant, once in a follow-up email, once on the phone, verbally, and the assistant confirmed each time without hesitation. She told Chelsea this, matter-of-factly, the way she told Chelsea most things. Chelsea went quiet in the way she did when she was holding something she wasn't ready to say. Nadia let her hold it. The week of the event, Siwoo was warmer than he had been in months, almost attentive. He touched her shoulder when he passed her in the kitchen. He asked about her day, and waited for the answer. Nadia noticed all of it. She noticed, and she did not trust it, not the way she once would have, and the fact that his warmth no longer landed the same way told her something important about where she had arrived inside this marriage. The night before the dinner, she laid the purple dress on the chair beside the window and sat next to it for a moment. Just sat. No performance, no narration, no version of herself she was managing for an audience. Just a woman, and a dress, and 4 years, and a choice she was still deciding whether she had already made. She had. She just needed the morning to confirm it. She arrived at the Meridian ballroom alone. Siwoo had said he would be there early for setup, that he would meet her inside. She had written that detail down too, in the small notebook she carried in her evening clutch, not because it was suspicious, but because she had learned that everything was potentially relevant, and you could not always know which things would matter until they did. The room was everything she had designed. The chandelier light fell exactly the way she had asked for. The white tablecloths were pressed. The florals she had chosen sat at the center of each table. Cream and deep green, understated, the kind that made a room feel like it had always looked this way. The music was what she had approved. 60 people in their best clothes, moving and laughing and holding glasses, carrying the particular energy of a room where something significant is being witnessed. She found the front table. She found the placard. Reserved. Gold-edged. Small. Set where her name was supposed to be. She found Yuna already seated beside it, in white, comfortable in the way of a woman who has been told she belongs somewhere, and had no reason yet to question it. Her glass was full. Her laugh was real. She did not yet know what that placard had displaced. She found Siwoo across the room, already hosting, already laughing, a man entirely at ease inside an evening he had constructed down to its smallest detail, including this one. The room watched Nadia. She felt every pair of eyes that moved to her, and then carefully away. She felt the quiet that settled like a held breath across the nearest tables. She stood at the entrance of the room she had planned, in the dress she had chosen, and she took one breath, slow, deliberate, the breath her mother had taught her to take before anything that required her full self, and she walked to a chair 3 tables back, sat down, set her evening clutch in her lap, and stayed. She ate dinner. She spoke when someone spoke to her. She gave that room nothing it had come expecting. No tears, no confrontation, no scene for anyone to carry home and repeat over breakfast. She was composed in the way only a woman who has already made her decision can be composed. Because falling apart is for people who are still surprised. Nadia was not surprised. Siwoo found her on her way out. He fell into step beside her near the door, voice low, cooperative, the tone he used when he wanted to manage something without it looking like management. "Don't make tonight into something it isn't," he said. Nadia stopped walking. She turned and looked at him, held his gaze long enough that the two colleagues standing nearby felt the temperature change between them, and found somewhere else to look. "I didn't make tonight anything," she said. "You did. Siwoo, our marriage was nothing to you." She walked to the car. She did not look back. At 5:47 in the morning, she was at the kitchen table. She had not slept, not because she was crying. She had done her crying privately, months ago, the night she found the account number that didn't match, and she had allowed herself exactly as long as she needed, and then she had picked up her pen. Tonight she was not grieving. Tonight she was thinking, and thinking thoroughly takes time. The documents were spread in front of her in the order her attorney had helped her organize them. 7 months of work. Financial statements, photographs, the original wire transfer documentation, account numbers traced back to their sources, the leather notebook open to the last page she had written, a compliance officer's version of a case file, clean, precise, devastating in the way that facts, assembled correctly, tend to be. She called her attorney at 6:15. The attorney arrived at 7 o'clock, which told Nadia she had been expecting the call for weeks. They sat across the kitchen table from each other, no small talk, no easing in, and the attorney opened the forensic accounting report and set it flat between them. Nadia's inheritance. The money her mother had left her. It had been used as the foundational capital for Siwoo's flagship property acquisition, the deal that had made headlines, the one he talked about at every dinner, as though it had sprung from his own vision alone. Her name appeared nowhere in the documentation. The account the wire had transferred into was traced to an LLC that had been formed 6 months before the marriage. The attorney set the page down and said it plainly. "He formed the structure before he married you." Nadia sat with that for a long moment. She did not move. She felt the coldness of it settle, not the cold of shock, but the cold of something premeditated, something constructed, something that had been designed before she ever stood beside him and said she chose him. The marriage was part of the plan, she said. It was not a question. The financial architecture suggests the marriage preceded the acquisition strategically, yes. Nadia's hands rested flat on the table, her mother's gesture, the one she used to press things down and keep them still before she filed them. She held that for just a moment, the recognition of whose hands she was using, and then she straightened. The attorney outlined the legal path, financial fraud within the marriage, recoverable assets, insurance implications, funds transferred without consent, a case that had been built, quietly, over 7 months, by a woman who had learned from her mother that the truth is always worth writing down. Chelsea arrived at 8:30. Nobody had called her. She had just driven. She came through the door with her coat still on, and looked at the two women at the table, and the documents between them, and pulled out a chair and sat down. The three of them stayed at that table for the rest of the morning. Nadia, Chelsea, the attorney, and 7 months of paper that represented everything Siwoo Cole had been certain he had already buried. When Siwoo was formally notified of the legal proceedings, his attorney's response arrived with the particular kind of measured language that means someone has just realized the information they were working with was dangerously incomplete. The careful, too controlled wording of a legal team that has been handed a situation they were not fully briefed on. Yuna had reached out to Nadia's attorney's office 3 days after the ballroom, independently, without being asked. She stated her willingness to provide a full account of everything she knew, everything she had been told, and everything she had been present for. Her testimony was thorough. She walked investigators through the full timeline. When the relationship started, what Siwoo had told her about Nadia, that she was unstable, that the marriage had been over in everything but paperwork for years, that Yuna was not the other woman. She was, in his telling, the first woman, waiting patiently for the administrative process of the past to finish resolving itself. She described conversations in which Siwoo had spoken about the property structure by name, in which he had referenced the source of the original capital in terms that made it absolutely clear he knew exactly whose money it was and where it had come from. She described the dinner. She had been told it was an internal company event, that Nadia had declined the invitation, that the reserved sign at the front table was a placeholder for a seat that would be reassigned once the final attendee count came in. She did not know what the placard said or where it was placed until she arrived, and by then the room was filling and Siwoo was moving through it with the ease of a man who had rehearsed every part of this evening and was confident in the performance. She had not known. And then she had, and she had told the truth about it. The social circle rearranged itself the way these things always do. People who had dressed up and come to watch, suddenly discovering that proximity to the wrong side of a fraud case was not the association they were looking for. The dissolution happened quickly, as it tends to when the math changes. Two of Siwoo's business partners reviewed their own exposures and exited shared ventures through formal legal notices, the kind that go on record. One called Nadia personally. He said he had no knowledge of the financial structure. He said it in the careful way of a man who is not entirely sure he believes himself but hopes she will. She received the call with professional courtesy and passed his number to her attorney. That was all. The settlement proceedings began, and they were not comfortable for Siwoo Cole. The settlement took what was Nadia's and returned it. Her inheritance fully accounted for, restored with interest across every year of the marriage. Her stake in the property portfolio, the one her money had built and her name had never touched, legally established and formalized. The marital home signed over to her outright. Compensatory damages for documented financial fraud, calculated with the kind of precision that comes from 7 months of records kept by a woman who learned early that documentation is dignity. Siwoo's business license was flagged pending the outcome of the fraud investigation. 2 counts of financial misrepresentation. 1 count related to the forged account documentation that had rerouted her inheritance into an LLC she had never known existed. Nadia moved through the proceedings, the way she moved through everything. With composure, with precision, with the bone-deep steadiness of someone who has already decided who she is, and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. But in private, in Chelsea's kitchen, on a Saturday morning with tea, and the kind of light that comes through old windows, and lands soft on everything, she let herself feel it. Not rage, something more honest than rage. Grief, real and specific, for the marriage she had thought she was building. For the woman she had been 4 years ago who stood at a window with a man who felt like stillness, and thought, this is safe, and alongside the grief, something else. Recognition. The slow, steady recognition of a woman who had almost disappeared inside someone else's architecture and had, barely, carefully, because of a dead mother's voice in her ear, and a best friend who noticed when she stopped finishing sentences, found her way back to herself. 6 months after the settlement closed, Nadia was in her own apartment. High ceilings she had chosen herself, light she did not have to negotiate for, mornings that belonged entirely to her, no one else's schedule running in the background of her mind, no performance to prepare for, no careful translation of someone else's cruelty into something she could survive. She started a financial mentorship program. Informal at first, women in her professional network who heard what she had navigated and asked her how. She told them the practical version, because the practical version was the one that could actually be used. Document everything. Maintain your own accounts, always, regardless of how much you trust the person beside you. Never let love become the reason you stop reading the fine print. They listen the way people listen when someone is telling them something true. Chelsea came for dinner 2 months after the move. They ate at the table by the window and talked the way they used to talk before. Full sentences, unhurried, without Nadia measuring how much space she was taking up. At the end of the evening, Chelsea looked at her and said, "You sound like yourself again." Nadia considered this. "I sound like my mother." Chelsea smiled. Same thing. Then, on a Tuesday evening, her phone showed an unknown number. She had learned to pay attention to those. She opened the message. It was Yuna. 2 sentences only. "I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. I hope you're well." Nadia sat with it for a long moment. She thought about a hotel corridor and 2 women standing in it, and the enormous weight of a silence that had not been hostile. She thought about a woman in white at a front table who had been told she was safe somewhere that was not in fact safe. She thought about all the ways Siwoo Cole had built his life out of people who trusted him, and how none of them had been allowed to see the whole board. She typed back, "Me too. Take care of yourself." And she meant it. The leather notebook was on her kitchen table the next morning. She didn't open it to document anything. She opened it just to see her own handwriting, the dates and amounts and sequences she had pressed into those pages in the dark, in the months when she was performing a marriage and quietly saving herself at the same time. She ran her thumb across a page the way her mother used to press receipts flat. She drank her tea while it was still hot. The morning light did exactly what she had hoped it would when she chose this apartment. Nobody else's schedule lived in her head. The day was entirely hers. And this is what she knows now, what she would tell you, if she were sitting across from you at that table. Love should never cost you the person you are. And when it asks for that price, when it slides the bill across the table and waits, the answer is always no. Not eventually. Not after one more chance. Not when things calm down or when you feel stronger, or when the timing is better. Now. The answer is always now. Because the woman you are is not a payment. She is not collateral. She is not something you offer up to prove that you are worth staying for. She is the whole point.